Hello, welcome back to Madrona's Pulse Teachings. I am Iris, and I am going to talk with you about this mighty month of November. I do not always do kind of an astrology of the month ahead, but this is a mighty month. There's no doubt about it. And I think it is really helpful for us to come into the month, starting with the Scorpio New Moon, having an awareness of all that is unfolding this month, so that we can, as we do with evolutionary and embodied astrology, co-create. And this is really important for November, because until we get to November 21st, we have got our sun in Scorpio. And Sun in Scorpio does so good when it's meeting experience and transforming and being real with what's here. Sun in Scorpio doesn't do as well when there is a very strong drive of fear. When Scorpio is acting out of fear, it gets messy. And there is a heck of a lot of astrology out there that is really bringing an interpretation that is based in fear to the astrology at hand. And that just isn't useful. It's just not useful, because that's not how Scorpio wants to move. A Scorpio sun wants to dive into what is here. It wants to feel what is present, and it wants to, from that embodied feeling of merging completely with what is here, it wants to transform. And that's what Scorpio season is about. That's what the archetype is about. And that is definitely what Scorpio season is about when Pluto is stationing into a new sign. And that is what happens. Pluto enters into Aquarius on November 19th. Okay, so we start off with this month with a Scorpio new moon. That new moon is, of course, charged because we do have Pluto opposite Mars, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And that Pluto opposition builds through the new moon with Mars. It becomes exact on November 3rd, and then it's going to keep building as Mars moves into Leo. And so we need to also be mindful about how we're working with that opposition once Mars is in Leo. Because Mars in Leo is very different than Mars in Cancer. And we're going to move into mid-November when we're going to have our Taurus Full Moon on November 15th. Saturn is also going to station direct that day. And then November 19th, we have Pluto enter into Aquarius. And then November 25th, we also have Mercury going retrograde. So there's a lot. There's a lot of charged energy. There is a lot of dynamic energy. And again, our job as spiritual beings in these human bodies, working with astrology, working with archetypal astrology, is to co-create, is to know that we have choice. We have choice to be wakeful. We have choice to move how we want and need to move. And when we come into our own lives through an embodied perspective, which does not just lead with a cognitive mind conditioned by, frankly, hundreds of years of colonial capitalism, it moves in a co-creative dynamic relationship with what is present. And that's a very different way of being. And that is a Scorpionic way of being. So let's look at some of these stages to help ground us as we enter November. And it is true. This month is a shedding. This month, there is no going back. Pluto enters into Aquarius. It's going to be over 200 years for when Pluto comes back into Capricorn. So we are moving on. And that is going to bring a lot of energy with it and a lot of emotions with it. And that is okay. We also have awareness of how we get to choose to respond to all of those dynamic emotions that are most likely going to come up in different ways at different stages throughout the month. So starting with our new moon on the 1st, we want to try and cultivate presence. We want to try and be with the dark moon in our own psyche, in our own body. If this is 5 minutes for you, it's 5 minutes. If this is a day, it's a day. And this can extend beyond the 1st. Really, the 1st and the 2nd, we're ended to the 3rd. We're working with these energies. And it is very strong, this dark moon, this Scorpio new moon, because Pluto is opposite Mars. So Pluto is in that final degree of Capricorn. Mars is at the final degree of Cancer. And they are squaring Juno, okay? And Juno for the new moon is at that final degree of Libra. Then she is going to move into Scorpio as Mars is going to move into Leo. And so we also want to be mindful as we move through these first 5, 6, 7, 8 days of November. Mars opposite Pluto in Cancer, a bit different than Mars opposite Pluto in Leo. Okay, in Cancer, for the new moon, for the first few days, we are in the exact opposition as on the 3rd. We are really being asked to be in a place of self-care, to listen to what it means to nurture ourselves actively so that we don't implode and or explode. And then we're going to, and to pay attention. This is Pluto, deep unconscious evolutionary impulses, evolutionary for the sake of empowerment. How do we need to nurture ourselves and hold ourselves with integrity as we are going through this evolutionary phase in a dark moon? How do we see with all that is happening in a quietude? This is a meditative moment, okay? And so it's coming into that meditative moment helps us not to kind of lose track of ourselves and get pulled away by the energy. And then Mars is going to move into that first degree of Leo. And that's, Leo wants to feel creative energy flowing through it and create with it. Now, Mars in Leo, when it's operating out of fear, stress, it performs. It seeks validation. It doesn't have a sense of its own creative self as a tool and a channel to the divine. It seeks it externally. And it usually gets caught in vicious loops seeking external validation. Mars in Leo opposite Pluto, that can go into a battle of the wills. And we do know if we're falling into a battle of the wills, we're taking a step back and we're checking in with ourselves, because Juno has moved to the beginning degrees of Scorpio. And she wants to deep dive into intimacy. She wants to be present and transform and hold integrity. And a battle of the wills is rarely about a mindful awareness of integrity. It is getting caught and triggered and feeling pressure and going into kind of a flight mode. And we can pull back from that if that should happen. Now, ideally, we feel that transformative creativity. We might be able to access that with a partner, whether that is a romantic partner, a friend partner, a business partner, any relationship where we hold integrity. That Juno is important. And when she's in Scorpio and she's in in Libra, she is about relationship and intimacy. And so she is talking with Mars and Pluto as we move through this first week of November. So we might lean into relationship, especially those relationships that ground us and we feel safe. Juno in the first degrees of Scorpio needs to feel safe with whomever she is in intimate relations with. So there, if we're not finding that with another person, then we do pull back and we either seek out the people that we know we feel safe with, whether that is a best friend or a therapist, and or animal beings. We go into relationship with ourselves. We journal with ourselves, because that's going to anchor us to honor the creative energy that most likely is transformative, because it is opposite Pluto. And this might just be dropping glimpses of how we want to be our most authentic self, okay? And Pluto's moving into Aquarius. We got 20 years to work on our deep soul authentic self. And Mars is going to go retrograde. So it's going to move back through Leo and it's going to go all back into Cancer to 17 degrees of Cancer. So this is a process. And this conversation, this soul deep conversation between Mars and Pluto is a process. We're going to have 2 more passes after this week, okay? One as we move into the beginning of January and one at the end of April. And so we're in process of deep soul transformative energy. Aren't we always? Yes, we are, because this is evolutionary astrology and that is what Pluto is all about. So now we're moving and we're coming into the full moon. okay, as we move through that opposition between Mars and Pluto. And our full moon is on the 15th, and it is the moon up there at 24 degrees of Taurus, and it is the sun at 24 degrees of Scorpio. And for this full moon, the moon is conjunct Uranus. Uranus is at 25 degrees of Taurus. This is very significant. We have a full moon during Scorpio season, conjunct Uranus, 4 days before Pluto moves into Aquarius, the sign ruled by Uranus, whereas Pluto connects us to Scorpio. So we have very strong archetypes coming through in the middle of this month. The moon, for the Taurus full moon, conjunct Uranus, is radical awakening embodiment. Radical embodiment that pulls us into our present moment, that pulls us into ourselves, that pulls us into our body's consciousness, that connects us to earth consciousness. Taurus, like no other earth sign, can connect to earth consciousness, where we actually can intuit and understand ourselves as a species of this earth. Body consciousness, earth consciousness, radical embodiment does not move from a cognitive learning about how we are supposed to be. It does not move towards an economics that is just about increasing capital and profit. It works in dynamic, awakened relationship with the ecosystems it is a part of to create sustainable, wakeful living for ourselves, for our relationships, and for our environment. That is all part of Taurus, and it's all part of Uranus and Taurus, and we have a full moon there. And that radical awakening, right, that is also, of course, opposite our Scorpio sun. So this is about our own paths as well. This is about an illumination coming into our wakeful embodiment that helps us heal our own wounds so that we can move into that more sustainable living. This is also about, that radical wakefulness that helps us heal our intimacies. Scorpio is about intimacies. Uranus is also, of course, wild card energy. It can be sudden changes, but anything that Uranus works with is driven by an evolutionary impulse to awaken. And so that's where Uranus, all the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, they do not work in categories of this is good, this is bad. They work from an evolutionary impulse. And so Uranus seeks to awaken. And so during the full moon, we want to just be very mindful, it's a Uranus word, of what is awakening and feeling it in our bodies, in our senses, coming home to ourself. And then Pluto enters into Aquarius 4 days later. Pluto enters into the sign that is ruled by Uranus, okay? And here we have the final shedding has happened. We move into now a new era of what it means to be awakened beings, what it means to be on journeys of awakening, what it means to be organizing ourselves and society in ways that are truly about the benefit of all, that are truly about the evolution of our species and the earth. Aquarius is actually a very complicated sign because it has this relationship between the individual and the collective. And it is a very strong individuating spirit. It is, that archetype of the rebellious genius that aligns with Aquarius. It aligns with Uranus. And Uranus wants to rebel against a status quo in mainstream values that do not serve the collective, but that is felt very personally. And yet when Aquarius is moving from fear or it's resisting, it can forget about the connection to the collective, and it can move into rebellion for the sake of rebellion. And it can move for the sake of its own kind of somewhat narcissistic idea of individuality. And that's when it's moving out of fear. And we are, of course, going to see a lot of that with Pluto in Aquarius. But when Pluto in Aquarius helps us to align to soul evolution, and we connect to that, and it is literally being connected through a web to all that is. Aquarius takes us into, in Buddhist was Indra's net, where we are all jewels, and we are all shining and reflecting eternal presence, and none of us are better than the other. This is kind of the interconnection that in Aquarius we can simply intuit through a visionary intellect. And that energy is what Pluto is moving into, coming just after a Taurus full moon conjunct Uranus. So there is big change energy. There is evolutionary energy. And it is energy that's taking us into a new place. Now, that said, it is just the beginning. And therefore, whatever is occurring in the collective this month, in our own lives this month, remember, it is part of something so much bigger. This is the outer planets. They are all talking to each other. They are very active. There is something that is so much bigger than any single life, than even this moment. And we can remember that as we move through this month, as we meet whatever it is that we meet, that there is something in process and we don't understand it all right now. We simply can't. And as if we needed more of a reminder that we can't understand it all, at the end of this month, November 25th, Mercury in Sagittarius goes retrograde. And it does that by being in conversation in opposition to Jupiter retrograde in Gemini. Okay, so Mercury, of course, rules Gemini. So this is going to be, there could be a little bit of static going on in our minds, as Mercury stations retrograde, as we move out of November and into December. And there we just really want to remember to, meditation could be really lovely. Whatever meditation looks like for you, there's so many different ways to come into meditative practices. But getting out of a thinking mind, getting out of trying to understand everything, Mercury stationing retrograde in Sagittarius literally is a message that we need to backstep, that we need to reflect, that we might have thought we had an understanding of how the big picture was coming together. And that big picture is a mosaic that is shifting, and we need to allow it to shift. Jupiter being opposite in Gemini just confirms that. And so we just recognize that we are coming into a reflective process as we move through the end of November and into December. And therefore, we don't need to understand the major shifts, especially through self-inquiry when we're using astrology to understand our own paths. We don't need to understand what exactly is going on right now. What we can do, and it's helpful to do, is to just witness the process unfolding, to respond from our intuition. Saturn stations direct in Pisces on the 15th with the full moon. That is a forward motion with our intuition. That is a forward motion with our intuition that has cleared out some gook. Saturn has been clearing out some gook so that we can move forward and build spiritual lives in new ways, which we are doing a lot more of in 2025 and 2026 with Saturn and Neptune. But that is also part of November. And of course, Scorpio is a sign of intuition, is deep intuition. It is our witchy intuition, reclaimed. It is, trusting our own inner journey and inner process, trusting when and where we feel transformation needs to be a process that we're undergoing, even if that goes against what our plan was and or what others are saying. Okay, Scorpio is that intuition. And it might be important to follow and listen and journal and make art with and dance with and dream with our intuition during this time, because Pluto is, of course, related to a very deep soul intuition that is much, much deeper than what the cognitive mind can access. And yet, especially with that full moon conjunct Uranus, we might be able to glimpse. We might be able to get downloads, glimpse them however they come. If they come in meditation or out in nature or just through kind of free flow writing, however, we access that kind of meditative state when the information can just flow through us, that is a wonderful to practice, especially as we're around that full moon and especially as we're moving through with Pluto entering into Aquarius. And it is an exciting time. It is also a lot of energy. And so, of course, caring for the nervous system, those are Aquarius and Uranian necessities. Knowing that there's a lot of energy means that we might pull back a bit. Again, we trust what we're feeling. How this is going to impact us in our own life, of course, depends upon our natal chart and what's being activated. But we also, without looking at our chart, just feeling into what is coming up for you and witnessing it before reacting. Okay, we want to witness, at least for a breath, at least give yourself a breath, ideally a lot of breaths before reacting, because this energy there's a lot of energy here. And again, when we give ourselves the awareness, oh my gosh, timelines can shift. We can heal deep, like a Scorpio season, we can heal deep wounds that, layers we didn't even know were still open. They can come up and then they can heal and then we can journey forth. And then, of course, at some other time, we're in a spiral of multi-dimensions. They're going to come up again in a new way and they're going to heal even in a new way. And this is the beauty of being on healing journeys. And it's all happening now. So blessings for this November. I will see you soon, and I'm sending a lot of love. Be well.